You know, everybody has a widow's mite story, and I'd like to share mine with you. You know, the widow's mite is the story of the woman that Jesus meets in the temple. And she takes 2 small coins and she puts them in the temple, and Jesus praises her for her great generosity because she gives what she has. I used to serve a 3-point charge up in northern New Hampshire, up in the Mascoma Valley. I preached at West Canaan at 8:50, and then in Enfield at 9:15, and then back in Canaan at 10:30. And I'd tell them in West Canaan if the sermon wasn't any good that they shouldn't tell me, because I still had to preach it 2 more times. And one of the great saints of the West Canaan church was a woman named Lita Hardy. Now, Lita was good old New Hampshire Yankee from way back. She was born on a farm in Grafton, and her dad was a sheep farmer. Later, she married Louis, and they moved a few miles west to get closer to Hanover and Lebanon. Louis was a farmer, and he was a carpenter. He built the house that they lived in, and he built it in the days before they had things such as insulation and central heat. After Louis died, Lita asked me if I'd be willing to pick her up on Sunday mornings before church so she could attend worship. Lita never learned to drive. So I said that I'd be glad to, and my Sunday mornings began at 7:30, picking Lita up to go to church. Except one Sunday was different than all the others. It was cold. And it had been cold for weeks. It was about 30 degrees below zero, and it had been that cold for 4 or 5 days. And that Sunday morning at 7:30, when I knocked on the door, Lita opened the door and let me in. And she looked at me and said, "Preacher, I'm not going to church today. I'm sick." She was wearing this big old house coat draped over her, and she started to cough and sneeze, and she reached into that house coat and she pulled out a well-used Kleenex, and she used it again. And she huddled up around this cook stove. I don't know if you remember these, but there's a small firebox on one side, not very large, and a larger oven next to it. That was the only heat that she had in this drafty, old house. She was freezing cold. She was sick. Now, I was tempted to say, "Lita, I don't care how sick you are. Come to church, but at least be warm." You know, it dawned on me that Lita didn't have a furnace in her own house, but she probably gave money so that little chapel in West Canaan would have a furnace. And then Lita reached into that same pocket where she had that well-used and quite germ-infected Kleenex, and she pulled out her offering envelope, and she reached out and she handed it to me and said, "Preacher, put this in the plate. I can't have my church getting behind." And I took it, germs and all. And I got infected that morning. And it wasn't a cold. There she was, filled with grief and sickness and freezing. But giving was important to her. Sharing mattered. You know, the story of the widow's mite is so important because when Jesus sees that woman in the temple make that gift, it is a prefiguring of what he will do. That just as she put that gift in that temple, so he will give his very last, his utmost on the cross. That just as she gave her last coin, so Jesus gives his last breath. That you and I might experience the grace of God. That we might know the fullness of God's presence. like that widow, like Lita Hardy in that farmhouse morning, gave out of love and hope and compassion. Paul suggests three things about giving in this passage from Corinthians. He suggests the first thing about giving is that it has to flow from our hearts. That it has to be an expression of what we love and what we value and what we care about. Second thing Paul says about giving from a biblical and scriptural point of view is that we don't do it reluctantly or grumbling or complaining or worrying or arguing. Thirdly, Paul says, we do it cheerfully. We do it with joy because the God of joy has so richly blessed us. Our new bishop is a great joy and a delight. I heard him preach on Friday night, and he has a wonderful way of with words. He said, no member of the church ever took a vow to say, I will sit in the pew and do nothing. We promised our prayers. We promised our presence. We promised our gifts. We promised our service. We promised our witness. That's what we said we'd do. That's what it means to be here, to be committed. I've been enjoying this daily devotional. We've been sharing it, but I would like to tell you the story of how it came, because it's about an unfolding of prayers, presence, gifts, and service. We were sitting in the finance committee back early in the fall, and we were making the plans for the program, and the finance committee did as finance committees ought to do. They're quite cautious. And we were talking about the book and its cost and its expense and its relative value and whether or not we should go ahead and spend the money to buy it. And we were going back and forth, and all of a sudden Terry Large passed me a note. And on the note, Terry said, I'll buy some of those books. So I took the note and I read it, and then I passed the note back to Terry saying, can I share that information with the finance committee? And then passed it over, and Terry passed it back to me, and is it okay to pass notes during committee meetings? I don't know. Terry said yes. So I shared with the committee that this one person had volunteered some generosity to help provide this resource for the congregation. And then someone else in the committee, I think it was Don Griffith, who chirped in and said, well, I'll buy some too. And lo and behold, by the time we were ready to pass out the books, everybody, there was enough. There was enough. There was enough. Can I take an experiment? I want you all to close your eyes and put your hand up in the air if you read the book and if you found it meaningful. Okay? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I'd say it was a success. To give joyfully. To do what we do out of an expression of our love and our hope. I know this isn't the Oscars, but I want to take a few moments and just lift up and celebrate and say thank you to so many people. Don Griffith and Pat Neal were leaders of this campaign. Don chaired the finance committee, and Pat Neal was our team leader. Bob Lundholm put together a leadership summit, and we gathered for desserts about a month ago. Shoshana Cohn and Jessica Bolt put together refreshments, and Paula Del Bonis Platt told the story of her own journey toward generosity through her time in her church. Terry Large and Misty worked on some of the communications, and Bill and Jane coordinated the spiritual emphasis of the program, along with Penny, Thurston, and Sharon Gallagher. Roseanne organized a prayer vigil. Jim Batten wrote a prayer for us for each and every day of the campaign, and if you received that email, you were blessed daily by those words. And Peggy Topliff sent those out faithfully, and Deb Benator posted them on Facebook, that we all might be one people, one in our prayers. See, everybody doing a little bit, everybody doing their part together, enables us as a body to do something important and valuable. So I've been blessed by this campaign, and I'm so glad that we shared in it. This week, a lot of the focus of the reading was around tithing, and I believe that tithing is an important Christian discipline. Kathy and I have done that ever since we were married. Did I ever tell you the story of how we started tithing? We got married kind of young. I had one more year of college, and Kathy had graduated, and we were kind of far apart, and we decided to get married just a little on the young side. And so we did, and I was working as a youth minister in a church in Rochester, New Hampshire, and they paid me $45 a week. And Kathy got a job as a waitress at Kingman's Coffee Shop down in Newmarket, and we were getting ready to go to church in the morning on a Saturday night, and Kathy had the checkbook in her hand, and then she started asking me a few questions, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on. She said, "You make $45 a week, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what the church's going to pay me." And I made $130 at the coffee shop. And I said, "Yeah." She said, "No, that's $175, right?" "Yeah." Now, a tithe is 10%. So she wrote a check for $17.50, and I got this big lump in my throat. But I praise God for your faithfulness and your... Kathy grew up in a Christian home, in a family where the discipline of tithing was shared, nurtured. And I'm so grateful that she's blessed me with that gift. Here's some other words about tithing. These were from the devotional. Some people perceive the tithe to be nothing more than a leftover from the Old Testament law-based theology. They think it's an arbitrary rule with little relevance today. And yet, Jesus commended the practice, even among the Pharisees whom he criticized for making a show of their self-righteousness. The early church practiced the tithe, and so have Christians in every generation since. Then we're challenged. Name one person you admire and respect because they kept everything for themselves. Largeness of spirit leads to an eagerness to give our utmost and our highest. Despite the outward challenges and the inner struggles and the countercultural nature of generosity, where there is a desire to give, there is a way. 2 coins dropped in the treasury from the hand of a poor widow noticed by Jesus and recorded for all time as a model of extravagant generosity, forever reminds us that there's always a way. Giving helps us become what God wants us to be. I got a few cards. I know these are cards that people didn't check off the box which said they can be shared. But I figured if you gave me a card, it's okay anyway. First, we have two from our children. One from Rachel Venator. Ways that I can be generous. Volunteer my time to help others. Come to church and to Bible study. Be nice and friendly to everyone and give to those who are in need. And Bianca, at age 16, visit nursing homes. Donate toys for Toys for Tot. And Kylie says, I can donate money to the church project and make cards for the church shutters. Just to kind of summarize where we've been as a congregation, I'd like to read a couple of cards from each of the weeks. Things that I love about my church. All of the music and our new choir directors. Disciple class, UMW, the prayer shawl ministry. The sharing of concerns and celebrations. The excellent Sunday school program that Misty has put together that keeps our children interested in learning of God's love. People who've made a difference in my life. Someone just wrote my nest. Someone else wrote, Ginny Gersony, for her giving spirit to the United Methodist Women and her creative spirit in organizing and writing skits and performances. And under the vision and hopes for my new church, someone wrote a new roof. I suspect that was a trustee. That the church remains open to new ideas, new endeavors. Continue to be a welcoming church to all. To continue to be a welcoming church to all. Well, I already told you that I spent a little time with the bishop this past week and that he has a great way with words. He said, the church is made up of three types of Christians, he said. There are risk takers, there are caretakers, and there are undertakers. He was encouraging us to take some risks. To be a people who extend ourselves for the sake and for the benefit of another. And in the midst of that conversation, I heard two things that kind of surprised me and challenged me. One was a story of this small church up in Maine that, well, they just didn't have the money anymore to pay a custodian to clean the church on a regular basis. And they tried, all sorts of things to solve the problem, but never really got anywhere. And then there was this one homeless person who said that he had nowhere to go and that he really would like a nice, warm, dry place to go. And he said in exchange for that, he'd be willing to clean the church. They took a risk. They gave him a key. And he cleaned the church. And he made a difference with his time. And the giving of a gift made a difference in his life. And no sooner had that person from Maine told that story than someone else chimed in from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Pastor of an inner city church that really needed to paint the sanctuary, but they didn't quite have enough money to pay a professional painter the appropriate amount of money that such a person deserves. So they organized a few of the homeless men that lived nearby that church. And the church gave them a little bit of money, gave them what they could. You see, there's always a way. There's always a way if we're willing to be risk takers. And there's never a way if we just